Okay, we have, I think, 2 times left together, this week and next week, I think.
And then what?
And then I don't know. What I want to do is really land on some really hopefully very practical things, what do we do with all of this kind of stuff? And so really then, this last section, we are talking about assessing for demonic presence, confronting the demonic, and more generally, ministering to people. Because as we'll see, there's a lot of actually overlap. When we talk about spiritual warfare, I think sometimes we can think we're talking about a very specific subset of what's going on. But the reality is, if you can remember way back to the beginning, our working definition of spiritual warfare, we had put forward this working definition, right? You could find this, ponder it, meditate on it, but it's in the ballpark. And it was this: bringing the power, perspective, and truth of the gospel against everything which is set against the knowledge of God. Right? That was our definition of spiritual warfare. We got that from 2 Corinthians chapter 10. We could go just look at that again really very quickly.
Can you say that one more time, please?
The verse or the definition?
The definition.
The definition: bringing the power, perspective, and truth of the gospel against everything which is set against the knowledge of God. So 2 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul says the weapons of our warfare. Well, first he says, though we walk in the flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh. That's a very deep statement. Ponder that for a while. We don't wage war for human reasons with human means. We wage a spiritual war. And then he says, the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ, being ready to punish every disobedience when your obedience is complete. So the definition of spiritual warfare there for Paul is destroying arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God. That's what we're doing. When we talk about Satan and demons, we're talking about the powers that raise those arguments and lofty opinions and deceptions and temptations and accusations that create the need to destroy them. Does that make sense? And so we are looking for, when we're looking at spiritual warfare, it really is a very broad thing. And we've talked about this many different ways. But spiritual warfare is when you do righteousness instead of wickedness. Spiritual warfare is when you tell the truth to each other instead of lie. Spiritual warfare is when you walk with Jesus, just generally in life. Now, we do want to look at, but how do we know if there is a particular kind of demonic influence in a given situation or person or whatever? Okay, so the problem that we have is that we don't have a neat, clean list in the Bible of, what it looks like when a person is demonically influenced. Does that make sense? Like, we don't ever have like this neat, tidy list of, if a person checks these 5 diagnostic boxes, then there's a demon there. Does that make sense? It's not that clean. It's not that neat. There's a great deal of overlap, in fact, between sort of psychological or physiological trouble and spiritual warfare. In other words, there's a lot of things that can look like, demonic influence that may or may not be. So, for example, like substance abuse, drug use, the highs can look like demonic influence. Let me give an example of this. Phencyclidine, this is PCP, the drug PCP. It's also known as angel dust, ironically enough. People on this stuff are wild. One of the things, so it's a hallucinogen, and it dulls a person's perception of reality. And one of the included things in that, so they can hear voices, they can see visions. What it also does is it dulls people's pain receptors, so they dissociate from the sensation of pain, which means that people can do things that appear to be superhuman because they have absolutely no idea of damage being done to their body as it's being done, right? So when I was back in my undergrad, long time ago, college days, I was a resident assistant for a couple of years. And which mostly meant most of the time I was just like helping freshmen learn how to do laundry and stuff like that. But you know, it included this being on call kind of thing. And so there was one night in my senior year in particular that I was on call, and I got a call at 3 a.m. And this resident in my halls was like, "Hey, Phil is out of control down." Okay. Now Phil was this guy who's on the basketball team. He's like 6'8". And he had been out and about partying, doing whatever he was doing, and someone had given him, I believe, like marijuana that had been laced with this drug, with PCP. So he came back like hallucinating back to campus. He like stripped down to only his boxers. He started climbing palm trees. And your imagination, like, have you seen a palm tree? They're spiky. And he's climbing this thing, jumping off of them. At one point, he came into the dorm room, and he went up to the second floor, and there was this walkway that went right across the lobby of the dorm, across the middle of it. And he jumped off of that, landed on the ground, and then just took off running like he'd not been hurt. So looking like he's just superhuman. And so that wasn't as such demonic possession or something there. That was a drug abuse, right? So what's needed there? Well, in that very instant, what's needed is actually medical intervention, not necessarily, prayer. I mean, prayer is good too, but medical intervention. Mental health disorders and illnesses can look like spiritual attack, can look like demonic influence. So psychosis, for example, just refers broadly to a loss of contact with reality. And this is it's more of an acute symptom of usually other disorders like bipolar or dissociative identity or things like this. But when a person has a psychosis episode, they will have hallucinations. They will perceive things that aren't there. They will hear things that aren't being said. Or they may have delusions. They may have these firmly held, but nonetheless completely untrue beliefs, like paranoia, they're out to get me, or grandeur. And it can lead to, quite erratic behavior. Or you have dissociative identity disorder, what used to be called more commonly schizophrenia. It's a disorder that's most commonly caused by chronic, severe childhood trauma. So you have a person who is experiencing an inescapable, severe, chronic trauma as a vulnerable child. And their mind fragments, their identity fragments as a coping mechanism to deal with that. And it fragments, and the major symptoms of this disorder are the distinct personalities, dissociative amnesia, which is a significant non-routine forgetting of personal information, everyday events, or past experiences. And these folks will exhibit this personality switching. Now, you can kind of see why that would be useful in a childhood severe chronic trauma situation. Let's say that I'm a child and I live with a monster, like a real monster, right, of a person. And I can't do anything about that. I can't escape that situation. I can't get out of it. So what do I do? Well, what do you need to deal with a monster? Well, either another monster or a hero. But as a small child, I'm neither one of those things. So what we do then, the identity fragments so that now there is an identity that does take on. That's the monster. And that monster deals with the monster. And while that's happening, there's a dissociative amnesia. I don't remember what's going on there because that's the whole point. It's the coping. I don't want to remember. Do you see, right? This is not necessarily demonic possession or something like that. It's a mental health problem. Now, that doesn't mean that there's no spiritual or supernatural attack that comes with those things, but it means that it's not a neat, simple explanation. Is this making sense so far?
Can I back up and ask a question?
Yes.
Okay, so the guy in the dorm that's high,
Mm-hmm.
didn't even know he was going to get high, but he's at a party and somebody laces this. So there's evil at
Correct.
the party.
Yes, we'll get there.
Okay.
So here's what I'll get to this. The main point I want to make with all of this is that life is very complex and humans are complex. And spiritual warfare, and more broadly, ministry, requires actually dealing with people as whole people, right? Which might mean spiritual, but more than spiritual, but other things. We'll continue. We'll get in. That's the whole direction I'm going. So that's a great question. Lastly, there can be physiological illnesses or impairments that can appear to be supernatural issues. So the main one with this, although it's not a very good example, but it is an example, would be like epilepsy. Now, the Bible actually differentiates between what we'd call modern day epilepsy and demonic oppression. You can see this in Matthew chapter 4. So we're told that Jesus went throughout all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and every affliction among the people. So his fame spread throughout all Syria, and they brought him all the sick. And then look at what they say here. All the sick, those afflicted with various diseases and pains, those oppressed by demons, those having seizures, paralytics, and he healed them. Okay? So here's how I read that grammatically. There's an overarching category, and the category is the sick. And then there are these subcategories under that, but they're differentiated from each other. The sick, that is those afflicted with various diseases and pains, which is mostly what we would conceive of as sick, right? But also in the category of sick is those oppressed by demons. And also in the category of sick is the people having seizures. And also in the category of being sick is the paralytics. And the point then being is that one of the ways that we could see people, the human condition, is people are sick, and the church is like a hospital. And we want to treat people. We want to bring healing, right? But people are sick in many different ways. Among those ways, demonic oppression or influence or torment. Is that making sense? But the main ministry of healing people and restoring people has more to do with than just sort of casting out demons. Is that tracking? Now there'd be a question here that some would ask, and the question would be, is illness caused by demons? Okay. So again, there are places in the New Testament where you're seeing a person who is demonically oppressed and they have seizures. So then the question becomes, does the demon cause the illness? And then the broader question is all illness caused by demons? The short answer to that is no. No. We can say all illness, physical, mental, otherwise, ultimately originates with Adam's satanically induced rebellion against God. Yes? So death comes into the world because Adam rebels against God. And every manifestation of death. And I would say that illness, broadly, could be defined in one way as a manifestation of the power of death. Right? That which brings power against life, the life of God. But it does not mean that demons are directly responsible for all human illness. And we see that in the sense, again, there in Matthew 4, the scripture clearly distinguishes between demonic oppression and illness, whether physical or mental, even though those things sometimes coincide in the same person. Okay? So what that means is you see somebody who has mental illness. Doesn't mean that they are demonically oppressed, and it doesn't mean that they're not demonically oppressed. Is that making sense? Okay, so what do we do with all this? Well, it gets us into the idea. People are sick. Believers even sometimes are sick. And ministering to them is to bring healing to sickness. Now, here's where it gets a little bit complex. Humans are complicated creatures. Yes? Humans are complicated creatures. And what that means is that Satan attacks on many different fronts. Let me give some categories. I don't even know if this is exhaustive. It's just for us to ponder. What sort of creatures are humans, really? Humans are biological creatures, right? We're embodied creatures. We are, as Genesis 3 says, from the dust of the ground, which is to say, humans are made of the same stuff that the world around us is made of, right? Humans are made of carbon and water and I don't know. I don't have a degree in biology, but humans are made of the same stuff. What that means is that our bodies can be damaged. They can be ill. It can be sick. Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 4 that we live in, the phrase he uses is vessels of clay, right? Which is the point he's making there is fragile and weak, mortal, prone to illness. And the point for Paul there in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, we can just go to that really briefly. He gives us a purpose to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. There's a blessing in your feeble body. And the blessing is that you are reminded every day that the surpassing power for life, for gospel life especially, does not belong to you, but it is God's. God's power at work in you. It's a beautiful thing, I would say. Wouldn't you say? But you can only be reminded of that in your weakness, in your frailty. But what that also means is being vessels of clay, we are prone to injury, illness, or defect. We carry, in fact, genetic defects which increase our vulnerability. Let me give some examples of this. People who are, the term is homozygous. That means having the same variation, genetic variation. In this case, the short variant of the serotonin transponder gene. You don't have to, who cares about this, memorizing it. Doesn't matter. The point is this. People that have a certain genetic marker, and they know exactly what the marker is, have a increased vulnerability to depression, bipolar disorder, substance abuse. Like there's a literal physiological brokenness in the body that makes some people vulnerable to non-physiological problems. Do you see that? There's like problems in our body that actually make us prone to problems of the soul and problems of the conscience, problems of the heart. Another example of this, the presence of what they call the A2 variant of the dopamine receptor gene. Okay? Again, it's a certain genetic marker. Now, the interesting thing about this genetic marker is that it's present in at least 1/3 of the human population. And it strongly predisposes a person both to nicotine addiction and depression. So the point of that is this. Again, not that you go get a science degree in the Human Genome Project. The point is to say that there is a really robust recognition in the Christian faith that like we can look at something like the Human Genome Project, which says there's all kinds of genetic defects that people have. And we can say, well, duh, Genesis 3. We've literally inherited death from Adam. We've inherited defective bodies. And that should give us two things to consider. One is that fact does not relieve anyone who is capable of making decisions of responsibility for their actions. Okay? Okay, so if somebody is predisposed genetically towards substance abuse, it does not relieve them of responsibility for their actions. Namely, if they abuse drugs. So what I'm saying is we can't use a genetic predisposition as a justification for sin. That's all I'm saying with that.
So like my papa had alcoholism and my uncles had alcoholism.
Correct.
So my mom and I have just chose not to drink, like, ever, just because
Mhm.
we don't want to find out.
And that's probably a wise decision.
Yeah.
Right. And if you were to drink and if you were to become an alcoholic, you would not be able to blame your genes and escape accountability. That's the point that I'm making here, right? Now, on the other side of that, though, is that the knowledge that we are broken physically in innumerable ways. Like I give you two examples, right? Human Genome Project has mapped millions upon millions of genetic markers. And my guess is if we could exhaustively understand what every single one of those markers means, we would find probably quite the horrifying list of predispositions, right? In all of us, in many different ways. And so what that also should do, it should give us the hey, it doesn't relieve us of responsibility. It also means that we should have genuine compassion for one another. Because we're not ever looking at somebody else of you are uniquely stupid or broken or whatever. It's I actually have the same vulnerability. And maybe not the exact same vulnerability, but I too am compromised. We're all compromised, right? There's a psalm. The psalmist says that the Lord, he knows our frame, that we are dust. And that gives him compassion for us. It should give us compassion for one another. It should give us a little bit of slow your roll, right, with your judgment sometimes. So we're biological creatures. Now, the question there being is that given that biological facet of human existence, is there anything there, do you think, that the devil could exploit?
Of course.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. There's a whole lot there. Whole lot there. In fact, many of the sins that people commit are specifically embodied sins. I was reading the Screwtape Letters this morning, which if you haven't read the Screwtape Letters, you should. It's brilliant. It's just brilliant. And it's quite funny. I laugh out loud as I'm reading this book. And at one point, Screwtape, he's the main guy, he's writing letters to his nephew, Wormwood. They're trying to get this young Christian guy to abandon his faith and all that. And so he's talking about tempting people to gluttony. And then he says, what's crazy is the humans, they don't understand gluttony. They think that gluttony is only about overeating. He said, no, gluttony is about you have a certain appetite and you want things exactly that way. You want to satisfy. So a person who doesn't eat very much could still be a glutton in the sense that they have the way they want their food to be. And they make everybody else miserable around them to get it. So you think about the idea of someone who says there is a perfect right way to cook a steak. You know what I mean? Now let's say you take that to a level that's truly obnoxious and you go over to somebody's house and they don't cook it quite the right way and you just rip them apart for it kind of stuff, right? You're a glutton. You might eat this much of that steak, but you've made your appetite an idol. You see what I'm saying? The point being, though, that's a biological temptation. It's literally a temptation that attaches to the body and what you do in your embodied state. So we're biological creatures that give us many vulnerabilities. We're also emotional creatures. What's that?
There are some people that should not.
We're emotional creatures. Yes?
Yes.
So human beings have complex desires, motives, feelings. Are feelings bad? Well, okay, don't answer the question I didn't ask. Answer the question I did ask, because I know where you're going to go with that. I know where we all go. But honest, really honest question deep in your gut. Are feelings bad? Okay, so now some people, they'll answer that whatever they think the right way is, but what are they really, feelings are bad.
But our culture has made us think that some of them are, less preferable.
Sure. Well, one of the great idols of our culture is comfort. And we think that the main goal of life is to minimize and eradicate every discomfort I can ever experience, which is certainly not.
What's your point?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, because there's a whole part of the biblical theology that teaches you how to suffer well. So that would probably be the point. Feelings are not bad, but feelings are important. Feelings are important. They're an important signpost for you, right? But they're not infallible, and they are easily misunderstood. Okay? So, for example, we can feel a powerful emotion and then mistake the significance of that emotion. So there are some questions we should ask, maybe sometimes of ourselves or people that we're ministering to. They're experiencing a powerful emotion, right? At rock bottom, why am I feeling this? That's a good question to ask sometimes. What desire, discontent, sorrow, longing does this feeling express? And then a follow-up to that is this a godly desire? Right? So I have a powerful feeling. What does that mean? Why am I feeling this? What desire does that clue me in on? And then, is that a good desire? Let me give an example of how this can go a little sideways. Again, this is a C.S. Lewis screw tape letters thing. He brings out the illusion that people have. Humans tend to just assume this statement: my time is my own. And, even Screwtape, the demon, acknowledges this is a silly thing that humans think. If they think about it for just 5 seconds, you've never made any time. You didn't earn it. You can't create it. You can't make more. It's obviously not yours. Every single moment you have is a gift that you didn't make, earn, or create. So how could you possibly think you might as well conceive of the sun as belonging to you. Your time's not yours. So sometimes we can feel a powerful emotion, this anger or frustration, because somebody's intruded. And what it might reflect, what that emotion might reflect, is the belief, the desire to have sovereignty over my own time. Then you'd have to ask the question, is that a right desire or not? Is this making sense? The Bible actually faith calls us to evaluate what we're feeling, why we're feeling it, what it's saying. Or we might ask this: what course of action does this emotion suggest that I should take? Because usually, if we're honest, we don't just feel emotions. There is an attending suggestion of what you ought to do to rectify that. And then it's good to slow down and ask, is that a good course of action? Or is it not a good course of action? The human heart is complex and powerful. And we can't ignore that, but we can't make too much of it. There's an often sort of misunderstood verse, Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 9. Jeremiah says, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. There it is again, sick, ill. Who can understand it? Now, it does not say that the heart is as evil as it possibly could be. That's not what it says, right? So out of the same heart come wickedness, but also compassion and love. So it's not that the heart is only as exhaustively, completely wicked and evil as it possibly could be. That's not what he's saying. He's saying that it's deceitful, it does not tell the truth, and it is sick. And so the concluding question that Jeremiah gives is, who can understand it? So one of the things that we get from that is human beings, we're emotional creatures, but we don't understand what we're feeling. We don't understand our heart. Because our heart is sick, because it doesn't always tell the truth. And so who can understand it? And then the hope presented in the very next verse is, who can understand the heart? God can. I, the Lord, search the heart and test the mind, and I give every man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his deeds. And this is why you'll find over and over again in the Proverbs and the Psalms, you'll find the prayer of God's people for God to do exactly that. Lord, search my heart. God will tell you the truth when your heart will not. Okay? Now, again, human emotion is tricky, and it's tricky enough on its own, but do you think anything is there that Satan could exploit? A vulnerability to deceive, accuse, tempt, whatever the case may be, right? And so the presence of strong emotions doesn't really ever present a person with a clear course. Usually it presents them with a big question mark, and then maybe a wicked course as Satan steps in and meets that powerful emotion with a self-gratifying suggestion for you to take a course of action that does not honor God, but results in an immediate gratification of what you are seeking in that moment. Okay, so emotions. It doesn't mean that every time a person's experiencing wild, uncontrollable, strong emotions, that that's demonic oppression, but it means that this facet of human existence can be used by the devil quite mightily. So, for example, I have a 2-year-old in my house who has huge emotions. I don't think that means that, like, oh my gosh, there's a demon whispering in her ear right there. No, that's not the case. We can't identify strong emotions with demonic oppression, but we need to understand that Satan can exploit our emotions for bad things, okay? We're biological creatures, we're emotional creatures, we're psychological creatures. We possess minds and personhood as image bearers of God. Yes? So people hold beliefs, preconceptions, imaginations, and these actually have a lot to do with how they live their life. And some of the beliefs that we have are totally wrong beliefs. Beliefs about, for example, who is God. Here's an interesting practice to do, maybe sometimes for yourself or for people that you're talking to, ministering to, is draw a picture of God with words or with drawing, whatever. Not literally draw whatever, but paint a picture of God, but not the picture that you know you're supposed to paint, but like really who you think God is. So it'd be something like this, like when you hear the voice of God, what does the voice sound like?
Thunder.
Does it sound like a disappointed parent? Does it sound like, we'll get more to what that shows up as, but in your actual belief about God, it's not what you say that you believe, what you actually believe, it's what your life actually revolves around. It's what you do. Do you understand that? Like your beliefs don't most show up in your words. Your beliefs most show up in your actions. Jesus says that it's out of the overflow of the heart that the mouth speaks. And when he's saying heart there, in the Bible, heart's not just feelings. It's actually the seat of the will. Your heart is where you make decisions, where you weigh the different desires you have and then chart a course and make decisions along that course. That's your heart. And so Jesus says it's not your words that dictate what your heart is. It's that your heart already is something, and then it'll tend to overflow in what you say and in what you do. And so that's why I say, like, generally I find that if I ask people what they think God is like, particularly people who have been in the church for any length of time, I know that they know the right answer to that question. But I'm not asking for them to just tell me the right answer to the question. That's not healing. That's not spirit. That's not soul work. Soul work is when we ask one another, what do you really think God is like? And you say what you really think he's like without having to try to get the right answer. But that's a belief thing there. Does that make sense? But that's not belief just in mere intellectual exercise. That's belief in deep what you actually think is true about the world and about God and about you. And so again, is there anything there that the devil can exploit? Well, of course. One of his main tools is deception. And so our beliefs can be twisted by the deception of Satan in an innumerable ways. These twisted beliefs can become the very strongholds that Paul says that we're to tear down with the gospel. Right? So if we go back to 2 Corinthians and chapter 10. And Paul says we're destroying arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God. Okay, he's not talking there just about rhetorical debate. We engage people in debate so they can win arguments. That's not what he's saying. He's talking about strongholds here, and he's talking about lofty opinions and arguments as worldview. He's talking about people have conceptions about what's really going on around here, and about who's really in charge around here and about what he or she or it or they are really like. And so we are to meet that with the power and truth of the gospel to tear down a stronghold. I think that you will encounter people who hold deep in their minds and hearts strongholds. That when they think about God, they think something that's totally not true. And the goal there for you in ministry is not to try to win an argument with that person. The goal is try to give them the freedom of truth of the gospel. Right? So we are biological, emotional, psychological. We are also social creatures. We are gregarious. That is to say, we live in connection, and we are made to live in connection to other people and to God. Yes? We are made to live not as islands, but as integrated members of a social group. But the social fabric of humanity has been deeply damaged by sin, such that we are now paranoid of each other and of God. Think Genesis 3. First thing Adam and Eve do is hide. We've been hiding ever since. People hide today. There are people that you talk to where it's very, very difficult to actually talk to the real person because they're hiding. And why are they hiding? Because they're paranoid. Think you're going to get them. We're easily divided. We let other humans' voices be surrogates for the voice of God. Have you ever found that? I'll give an example of this. I had a boss in a church that I worked at before coming out here who was incredibly critical of me and ended up firing me. And when we left that church, some of the things that he had said to me about myself and about me, I couldn't get out of my head, right? So there's this voice that I have in my head. And I really thought for a season I was lost. I was like, I don't know if I should be in ministry. And so I thought about every possible path I could take. I thought I was this close to going into law enforcement. Honestly, I didn't even want to be in ministry. And I realized the reason for that is there's one person's voice that has taken on a disproportionate weight in my soul. And so that is a twisting of the social fabric, right? Other humans' voices are not to be the voice of God. But if we're honest, sometimes that's exactly what we do. We don't hear the voice of God as clearly as we like. And so in our desperation, in our impatience to hear from God, we just let somebody else be the surrogate for it. And we have somebody else speak into our life. Again, a lot of territory there for the devil to exploit. The devil will use our need for social connection and our fear of it, right? Both sides of the same coin. We desperately want to be connected to people, and we're terrified of it at the same time. And the devil will use that in many different ways. So he will stoke division among communities of people, particularly in the church. He'll magnify preferential or shallow or minor differences to make people have animosity toward each other. He will encourage us to listen with great weight to the wrong voices. He will encourage us to minimize the right voices. Have you ever had a moment in your life where you've got one really critical, accusatory, negative voice, even from a person, and you might have 100 people who love you, who are encouraging, who are pointing you to Christ, and somehow it's that one voice that's the one that you hear all the time. And again, that's why I ask, when you hear the voice of God, what does it sound like to you? Because I think for many people, if they're honest, it sounds like my disappointed parent. It sounds like that boss that hated me. It sounds like that particularly effective bully that was constantly picking on me. It sounds like that spouse that ripped my heart out. And when we think we're hearing the voice of God, that's the voice that's what it sounds like. Okay, so that's a stronghold there. It's like, well, no, that's not who God is. He's not like that. Or we can even perceive God like some person that we can't get out of our mind. Our social fabric, the social facet of our being is ripe for spiritual attack. Okay? And then lastly, again, this is not exhaustive, but we are biological, we are psychological, emotional, social, and we are spiritual creatures. So we are created with the capacity for fellowship with our Creator. And so far as we are able to tell, this is a privilege that no other creature of God, no other terrestrial creature of God possesses. What I mean by that is angels seem to be able to commune with God, right? But earth creatures, no other creature on earth seems to be given this privilege that we have, where we are able to commune with God. We are able not only to receive his commands, but to dialogue with him, to commune with him, to pray. And again, spiritual warfare, the devil above all else wants to destroy or minimize that connection. And so, how does this work then in practice? Well, here's the thing I'm trying to sketch out here, is that if we consider human beings in all of the many facets of our lives, you can start to see why ministry generally and spiritual warfare overlap. Do you see that? Because in every part of the human experience, there are places of longing, of fear, of hurt, of doubt. And these are places where, on the one hand, human beings are able to sink to extremely low depths completely on their own without any assistance from Satan. Yes? At the same time, Satan will exploit every vulnerability that he possibly can in order to exert influence on people. So, again, what this means is our working definition of spiritual warfare, that's why that's what it is. We are bringing the power, perspective, and truth of the gospel against everything which is set against the knowledge of God. Now, how do we do this? Well, what we are doing in spiritual warfare then is we are trying to not be outwitted by the devil. We are trying to identify places of vulnerability, places where the devil may be exploiting. So what that really requires then is deep work of the soul, deep understanding of our life story, but also in ministry with other people, their life story. So there's multiple areas to listen for. Let me give some practical thoughts on this. So for example, in the spiritual area, the devil wants to minimize or destroy the fellowship that a human being has with God. Above all else, he does not want the presence of God nearby a human. And he doesn't want that human aware of that presence. And so what will he do? He will distract them. He will give them a wrong conception of God. He will deceive them. So how can you identify where that's happening in a person? Well, you can ask some questions. For example, what is your prayer life like? Here's some great questions that you could just take into your small group. Like if you really wanted to have a real deep, edifying, soul work small group, just go ask your group these questions. What is your prayer life like? Let me give you some more specific questions. Do you pray? What happens when you pray? You could ask, again, draw a picture of God with words, with honestly, for some people, they would really thrive on like literally get a pen and paper, some markers, crayons, draw a picture of God. You can imagine doing this with a child, right? I want you to draw a picture. I want you to draw a picture of God and what he's like. And then look at that picture and think about, what does this person think God is like? And there are many people that are not children, but who just the way their mind works, it works more with pictorial kind, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's a really good ministry tool. Draw a picture of God. What do you really think is true about God? Another question, when did you meet Jesus? When did you meet Jesus?
Or have they ever?
Sure, exactly. Well, and this is why that's a specific question that's a little bit different than, okay, when did you become a Christian? Do you see the difference between those questions? Because to become a Christian is, when did you convert to our religion? And it's fine. It's fine to talk to people about when they became like that's a different thing. But when you're seeing like, okay, there might be some really troubling spiritual element of this person's life. It's like, when did you meet Jesus? Because at the end of the day, that's the thing, right? That's the thing. I don't want people to think the things I think. I don't want people to believe the things I believe or act like I act. You know, to the extent that I am a good picture of following Jesus, then I will say with Paul, like, imitate me as I imitate Christ and that kind of thing. But beneath all of that, I want people to meet Jesus. And I think sometimes we kind of forget that even in our Christian circles of like, that's what it's really about, isn't it? Sometimes when we're struggling, the exhortation that we need to give one another is, you need to go be with Jesus. Or if you need some help with that, maybe we should go be with him together. Maybe we should go pray. Maybe we should go open the Word of God, and right? I hope you're also seeing, you start doing this kind of ministry with people, and you're going to see, number one, great fruit will come from it. Number two, it's profoundly uncomfortable. Because a lot of people, it's like, whoa, this is going to a place of vulnerability that we don't sort of culturally tend to want to go. And then you can also ask, what other kinds of spiritual experiences have you had? Now, this is really good for just kind of understanding where there may be some demonic influence. Like, let's say that a person has had spiritual experiences with like occult kinds of things, and a person's feeling like they're under spiritual attack, and you find out that like, oh, they've dabbled in a bunch of occult practices, and okay, that might be something to deal with and to work through. On a cognitive level, so that's kind of some spiritual questions. Cognitive level, again, you're trying to listen to a whole life story from people. What fundamental beliefs drive a person? Beliefs, preconceptions, imaginations, or here's a category that we don't often think of, but what vows or oaths has a person made? And we sometimes, and I know that's going to sound weird to people. That can be like an overtly occultic thing. Like a vow is made as part of some kind of demonic ritual that people do. And that's out there. That's possible. It's also possible that people actually make these sort of below consciousness oaths. So let me give an example of this. It may be an absolute code that a person has come to live by that is not biblical, it's not commanded by the Lord, it's not anything like that. So it could be something like this. It could be a person who is humiliated by someone else. And consequently, they have this kind of foundational vow. Maybe they've never even consciously articulated it, but it's there. And it's something along the lines of, I will never trust, fill in the blank, a woman again, a man again, a Christian again. Does that make sense? You could see how like trauma, hurt, could result in a person making essentially a vow. And then that shows up like maybe years later. They didn't even realize that they made that vow. And you're having to try to unpack with them like, why is their marriage dysfunctional or something, right? You're trying to help your friends with their problems that they're having. And you're trying to listen, like what's going on in their soul. And you find out that, okay, well, there's a big piece of it. They vowed long ago that they were just not going to trust anybody Okay, so we've got to unpack that, and we've got to figure out there's a stronghold. And the power and perspective and truth of the gospel needs to be brought to bear. Is it a workable stance in life to just say, I will not trust anybody? No. No, can't do that. Other people may have a code, and it comes from a place of they've been just really bullied or wounded or whatever. People have a code of, I may not tell a person that they are wrong to their face. Some people live by that code. They've made that vow. They don't know that they've made it. They haven't said it. But do you see what I'm saying there? This is cognitive beliefs. And some of these beliefs are put there in part by demons, by deception. Something really bad happens to you, and you draw a conclusion from that trauma that's totally unbiblical. That's not gospel truth at all. And you draw that conclusion because here, like the moment of trauma happens, and then the devil's right there to say, see, these terrible people, like you can't. And he gives you an understanding of your life and the events of your life that's not at all the truth of God. Is that making sense? Emotional, the emotional area, questions you can ask people, things you can listen for. What kinds of fears does a person have? What are you afraid of? And again, these are the kinds of things where you wouldn't be able to just ask this question and then get like a really easy, direct answer. But you'd be listening for this kind of thing, right? Many people say, well, I'm not really afraid of anything. That's totally not true. Because you could ask it like, you could go around about it like this. Like you could say, like, what are the things that you would never converse with anybody about? Right? So when people are in a marriage, so one of the things that I look for when I do like premarital counseling, I will look for specifically the conversations that one or both of them feel like they cannot have. Right? There's something that we just can't talk about. Well, why not? And typically it's because there's some fear attached to it that they don't want to wade into. What kind of things are you afraid of? What do you really love? What kind of songs make you cry? Emotional areas. Again, listening to a whole life story to try to see where a person may have vulnerabilities, where they're being exploited by the devil. On a physical level, physical biological creatures, one of the things that we wildly neglect in the Christian world is just physical well-being, and we think that it's somehow like not relevant to more spiritual concerns. And so things like when people are really struggling, one of the questions we should ask them is, are you getting enough sleep? Right? Like, what's your activity level? What's your diet? What sort of medications? Right? We have troubles, and we often neglect completely the physical side of trying to treat that. Volitional is another area to listen for, places where people can be exploited. So volition has to do like the strength of the will, the ability to exercise agency. So this is an area, again, where you listen to people and you will find where people have strongholds, where they have bondage. There are some people who are, the phrase that I would use is, they are people of very low agency. And what I mean by that is, they're people who their self-perception is that they do not have the ability to make changes in their life. That they don't have the ability to make decisions and to see change come from them. And a lot of times this comes because they've bought into lies that are despairing, discouraging lies. So let me give an example in sort of the sin temptation realm. The devil will come to people and he convinces them The only way to get this temptation to stop is to give into it. Okay? So people are battling, they're fighting temptation, they're trying to honor God in everything they do, but it won't go away. And what they end up buying into is they buy into this lie of like, I can't choose. Sometimes people who have trauma in their past are people of very low agency, where they say, because my parents did X, Y, Z, this is just how I am. It's almost like they've inherited, again, it's almost like a vow. It's like they've inherited a family curse that they can't break. Okay? And that's agency. That's an area of volition. So as you talk to people, you're listening for what's their volition like? What's their strength of will? What's their grit, resilience, determination? What's their ability to exercise agency? And if they don't have a ability to exercise agency, why not? Is there trauma that is holding them hostage? Is there justifications for sin that they won't let go of? Like, what's going on there?
A lot of times it's embarrassment too.
Shame. Where are people ashamed? I'm hoping this is giving us just a robust picture of compassionate love for people and ministry to people, right? Like, ministry is not just like, here are the Christian doctrines, believe them, sucker. It's like, no, people are hurt in so many different ways. The hurt that people experience is overwhelming to me. Have you ever felt that?
But then don't you also come across people who, that they're coming from a place of hurt, but they don't view themselves
Correct.
as being hurt.
Yeah.
Or as coming from a
So,
certain role.
yeah,
They realize that's their
yes.
where they're coming from.
And that's a great thing to observe. People sometimes don't recognize that they're, and which all that does for us is it's a blessing that you even said that, because it dispels us of the notion that we can fix people. Totally can't fix people. What I'm more talking about, so sometimes you'll have this hurt from, so remember the Mark chapter 5, the guy that was oppressed by demons across the sea in the region of the Gadarenes. And it says when he saw Jesus, he came running to him and fell at his feet. That's the kind of person that I'm talking about. So he's tormented by all kinds of warfare, but he still sees, I want out of it, and he comes running to Christ. So that's the person that can be healed. That's the person whose sickness can be met with the love and compassion and truth of the gospel. And all you can do is try, but really robustly try. And then if a person just doesn't want to see it, then you can't change that. You can't do anything with that. There's a couple other areas. One, vocational. Vocational doesn't mean just job, but calling. Now, this has to do with, again, this is somewhat of in the realm of emotion. It has to do with a sense of calling in life. That's what I mean by vocational. And that's different than just a job. It has to do with a person's sense of meaning and direction and mission in life, of purpose. So again, like, people are hurting, and many of them have a voice in their head suggesting to them, you've got no reason to exist. And the voice of the devil is very often, quite literally, the voice of death. Like death. You've got no reason to exist. There's no purpose. Why don't you just kill yourself? Okay? So that's the weight of the vocational area of life. It's like people actually, well, we believe this in Christian theology. We believe that people are made in the image of God and given purpose and meaning and significance directly from Him, right? So when a person doesn't perceive that they have a reason to exist, that is definitionally a deceit, a lie. So again, what is spiritual warfare? It's bringing the power, perspective, and truth of the gospel to bear against everything that is raised against the knowledge of God. So, vocational. And then two last areas of life. Again, listening to a whole life story to see where a person has vulnerabilities or exploitive things from the devil. The last two kind of go together, and they're social and familial. The reason that I differentiate them is because they have a slightly different weight. So social has to do with friends, human connections, church, culture, social organizations. And so questions here to investigate with people: who do you spend time with? Who speaks deeply into your life? And Margine, this gets to kind of your point of like, some people won't let anyone speak deeply into their life because they don't want to reflect deeply on their life. Because, like I said, you really start asking these questions, like of yourself, of your own soul, of other people, it's profoundly uncomfortable because it requires you to face things that you have perhaps been avoiding facing. So for some people, that question, who speaks deeply into their life, for some people, the first thing that they need to understand is that no one is speaking deeply into their life, and that's a problem.
Or whoever does is speaking lies.
Well, and then the third question is, whose voice do you give the most weight to, right? And is that voice telling truth or lies? And again, there's much there that the devil can exploit, can use. And then connected to that is familial. Familial is by definition social, but this has to do more with family heritage, the nuclear family of origin experience. So again, some people have trauma that they have never actually realized has given them a bunch of strongholds and coping mechanisms that no longer serve them. Okay? And so you can see this not even in a childhood setting, but the very sort of stereotypical post-traumatic stress disorder that soldiers have when they come home. The very specific problem there is that they have these habits that kept them alive in war and don't help them at all in civilian life, and in fact harm them. So you just have a version of that type of thing in just so many areas of life. People pick up these coping mechanisms that you might say in a certain scenario in life that kept you alive. But in reality, it's dysfunctional and it won't serve you. In fact, it'll hurt you and ultimately it'll kill you. Okay? So and some people have, again, sort of, you're listening for the nuclear family of origin experience. Some people have inherited a generational sin. And I don't mean that like it's magic. What I mean by that is that we tend to do the things that our forefathers did. I was reading in Lamentations, and the people of Israel in Lamentations, they're bemoaning the fact that they say to God, our fathers committed these sins and they're all dead and we're the ones suffering the punishment. Well, the reality is it's like you guys are committing the same sins. And you are culpable for those. And so we want to figure out if people are walking in generational sins as though that is a magical curse that they can't, right? That gets back to the volition, the agency. But the point of that is to say we are called to repent of generational sin. And if we're not naive, we will understand that we are in all likelihood prone to repeating the sins of our forefathers unless we identify the sins that we are likely to inherit that we need to repent of. Okay? So the point of all of these things is to try to understand a whole life story to see where demonic powers may try to exploit hurts, fears, weaknesses, sorrows, etc. Okay? So that's a lot. We're past time. We'll conclude it there. But with any parting, and we're going to go next week. We'll conclude next week then on, with all those things, what would be the marks of demonic presence that needs a specific spiritual ministry for. But the point of today was to just sketch out ministry and spiritual warfare really is, it's not complicated in the sense that it's all gospel and it's all the truth of Christ. But what we need to understand is we need to nuance that a little bit more to say there are all these different facets of human experience and life that we need to meet robustly with the gospel. So, any last questions or thoughts on any of that? Yeah, you can ask me afterwards if you don't want your question to be. All right. Thank you, everybody.